Okay. I think we've got a few people still trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. Before we jump in, can everyone hear me okay? Yes, yes. Okay, wonderful. And you're, of course, welcome to keep all your cameras on. In fact, I like seeing everyone's faces, but if everyone could just mute their microphones for the time being, that would be great. At the end, we'll have a little questions section, so feel free to turn on your microphone and ask away or type in the chat, but just for now. All right, so hi everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Scope 1 and 2 Emissions, finally explained for real people with real jobs. We are going to do our best to make Scope 1 and 2 emissions feel really simple and practical in our little 30-minute window. So you can expect no jargon, no complicated theory, just what you actually need to understand and use. And this session is really for anyone and everyone. If you have no idea about your Scope 1 and 2 emissions, if you've been asked to look into them and don't know where to start, if you haven't been asked but are just curious, all of the above, you're in the right place. You don't need any kind of background in sustainability. Today is all about making it feel clear and manageable. Now, we always emphasize this in all of our webinars, but truly, I want this to be an interactive experience. So we love to be inundated with questions. So please go ahead and write them in the chat as they come to you, or hold on to them for the Q&A bit at the end. But we will be checking the chat throughout the webinar and addressing any questions. So feel free to type as you think of them. Okay. I also just want to give a short introduction to the team behind eMission Possible and, of course, your hosts for today's webinar. So I'm Kiri, and I'm the communications manager for 50 Shades Greener. We also have Nazia, who is our head of sustainability, and we have our fearless leader, founder, and CEO, Raquel. So, hi, guys.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Jumping in. All right. In fact, Raquel is going to be starting us off with why any of this actually matters. Oh, Raquel, are you there?
Oh, sorry, Raquel. I think you're on mute.
Would you imagine that this had to happen to me? Sorry about that.
You're good now.
I'll do my best now to do better. Right. So emissions reporting is becoming important really, really quickly. Large companies are required to report emissions under EU regulations, but even if your organization doesn't fall under reporting legislation yet, your clients or partners probably are. So they will start asking for your data. We've seen this with international giants like Microsoft, who from 2025, any reseller or supplier of Microsoft has had to report on their emissions. We're helping some of those companies as we speak. So getting ahead of this now is going to make your life much easier later on. And on top of that, the finance world rewards sustainability. Investors are now asking for sustainability reports before putting their money into organizations. Most of EU public contracts also require sustainability now in their applications, and banks even give better deals on green loans and finance. So the money world is now pushing sustainability. But this is, I guess, more than just a reporting compliance. When I first became a green manager in 2012, I didn't have a clue where to start, like many other people. But learning to measure my workplace emissions was my very first eureka moment or light bulb moment, because once I knew where the data came from, I realized that there were things I could do to reduce those numbers and in turn, the organization's environmental impact. Data, to me, is the single most important tool we have in our fight against climate change. We know climate change is happening because scientists analyze data, and each and every one of us have the power to change and reduce our own footprint. Funnily enough, it was a fossil fuel company, BP, that made a personal carbon calculator popular back in the early 2000s. Their goal was to push blame onto individual consumers, as they normally do, to deflect from their own responsibility. But I guess what they did not know back then is that they were giving us a key piece of information. Quantifying our emissions gives us visibility into our own patterns, where our emissions actually come from, and where the biggest opportunities for change are. What we may have begun by BP as a deflection has ultimately become a powerful lens for understanding and reducing our own impact. So the biggest takeaway from me is that if you measure it, you can manage it. So back to you, Kiri.
Great. Thank you for that, Raquel. And it hopefully gives a little bit of insight as to, yeah, why it's important. So now I will hand it over to Nazia to discuss why it's important, but more so why it feels just impossible. And spoiler alert, it is not your fault.
Absolutely. So thanks, Kiri. Hi, everyone. As Raquel mentioned, reporting on emissions is a regulatory requirement, and for many companies, it is going to become a mandatory one. Having said that, of course, we are here to telling you that it isn't rocket science. It's not hard to calculate your emissions. If you know what you're looking for, when is the best time to go look for it, and whom to ask for it. Now, of course, we understand that the regulatory and legal language can often be very complicated. This man is struggling right there, and so are we.
I
The guidance,
struggle
of
myself.
course, exactly. The guidance, of course, is very unclear oftentimes. Most companies don't have the perfect data. And worst of all is that the goalposts keep changing. So think CSRD, it's an acronym that keeps coming up. It's just one of the many new regulations that are coming down the lane. But the good news is that scope 1 and 2 are actually the easiest place to start when you go down your emissions reporting journey. And that's what we'll focus on today. So if we go further, and I just want to, again, reiterate, like Kiri said, that we're going to keep it in plain English. Any point, if anything doesn't make sense, please drop us those questions in the chat and we'll answer them. All right. So when you are reporting on emissions, there are 3 types: scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. For ease, we are covering scope 1 and 2 emissions today. Now, scope 1 is super simple. These are the emissions that are coming directly from things that your organization owns or controls. So if you burn fuel or you run something that uses fuel, that's your scope 1. So think natural gas for heating, fuels from company vehicles, on-site fuel generations from generators and boilers, as well as air conditioning leaks. All of these constitute as your scope 1. And a very quick way to remember this for future is that if you run it or burn it, it's probably your scope 1. Now on to scope 2. Scope 2, on the other hand, is the energy that you buy. So you are not creating the emissions yourself in this case, but you are using the energy that caused them. So that basically is your electricity bills and any heating or cooling bills that you receive from your supplier. Again, a very simple way to remember this is that if someone else creates the energy, but you are using it, it will be counted as your scope 2. Now, an interesting bit to remember is that there's a unit called carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the most important thing you need to remember when reporting on emissions. Emissions are measured in this unit. It is a standard unit that converts all greenhouse gases into one comparable number. So always remember this unit when you're reporting your emissions. Now let's do a quick reality check, for which I will bring Kiri back, who will help you identify your current gaps, which is, trust me, always a lot of fun. Over to you, Kiri.
Thank you, Nazia, and thank you for that overview of scope 1 and 2 emissions. Now, I don't know that finding your gaps is fun. I don't know if I would consider it fun, but it is a really important step and you're going to find it really helpful in the long run. So, to find your gaps, and I'll get into it in just a minute, but you want to start thinking about questions to ask yourself, like, do I know my sources? Do I know where my data is? And do I know how to calculate it? If you don't, that is completely normal. This is where most organizations struggle, and this is usually the biggest hurdle into starting your emissions reporting. Now, before I get into it a bit, are there any questions or anything that has popped up so far?
Nothing in the chat yet here, Kiri, but yeah, drop in your questions, anybody, about scope 1 and 2.
Okay, perfect. Then I will plow on. Okay, so as I mentioned, the first step to getting a grasp on your emissions is going to be to identify your gaps. And these are typically going to be one of three things. The first, can you name your scope 1 and 2 sources right now? Do you have a list of these sources? Your gas boilers, vehicles, fuel, purchase electricity. Do you have a list anywhere? Second, do you know where your data lives? Is it with finance? Is it with facilities or energy suppliers? Or does nobody really know? Third is going to be, do you know how to convert your data into the CO2 equivalent? And do you have the right emissions factors? So of these three, I want to just do a really quick poll and have you guys put into the chat either 1, 2, or 3 based on which of these, as you read through them, makes you hesitate or feels the most daunting, or you read it and you really quickly go, yep, nope, I don't know that. So go ahead and type it into the chat and we'll have a see over what the main ones are. And once you have typed it into the chat, well, congratulations, you've just identified your primary gap. How's the chat looking, Raquel?
Number three, and then number 1, refrigerants. So do you know how to convert that into CO2 is the most picked option. And then number 1, but relation to refrigerants. We might talk about refrigerants in the Q&A.
Yeah, great. And to be honest, I'm not surprised that number 3 is the most common one. I think the minute an equation or calculation comes in, even I myself think, oh no, how do I do that? So makes perfect sense. Now that we've identified those gaps, predominantly number 3, here's basically how you're going to overcome them. And the solution is pretty simple. So you don't need complicated systems or templates. You just need to break it down and give it a little bit of structure. And in fact, that structure amounts to only 5 things that you really need to get through. So the first, as I've repeated a few times, is going to be creating an inventory list, your scope 1 and 2 sources in your organization. So for a small business, this should be fairly straightforward. Indeed, it can be a little bit more complicated for larger companies, but then that's a great time to get a team together and work through it together. Second is your activity data. So how much gas did you use? How much electricity? How many liters of fuel? Your sources for this are going to be your utility bills, your fleet records, your finance system, facilities team, etc. And it's important to note that you're going to want to measure these on a monthly basis. So not only does that break it down into smaller, manageable pieces, but it also gives you an easily comparable metric. You can do month of 1 year to the same month the year previous. You can do month to the previous month or the following month. So it just gives you a nice, easy comparison point. Okay. Third is you want the right emission factors. So this is what's going to convert your activity data. That's your raw data, your fuel, your electricity. That's what's going to convert it into a CO2 equivalent figure. And these are going to vary from country to country. So your sources might be SCAI for Ireland. The UK government website has a page on it, the GHG protocol. So you can find the one that's right for where you're based. And if you're struggling at all to find your emissions factors, feel free to pop into our Sustainability Hub. We host it every Wednesday at 1:30 UTC. It's a free space for anyone to come in and ask any questions sustainability related. I mean, to be fair, sometimes we just chat about things, but you're also welcome to do that. But we would gladly help you find the right emissions factors based where you are. Okay, the fourth thing you need is going to be a baseline year. So that's 1 full calendar year as your starting point. And as we are currently in 2026, Ideally, you're going to be starting with 2025 as your baseline year, but keep in mind you're going to want a full set of data, so 12 months of data for your baseline year. So if you're missing a big chunk from 2025 because you changed energy management companies or you moved buildings or something like that, maybe consider looking at 2024 or a different year as your baseline year. Okay. And number 5, the most daunting piece, but I swear it's really easy, is a simple calculation framework. So to calculate your CO2 equivalent, it's an easy multiplication. It's taking your activity data multiplied by your emission factor, which you can find online, and that's how you get your CO2 equivalent. So for all of those who put number 3 as their most daunting, the calculation piece, it's a really simple multiplication equation. And that's it. That's really all you need to get a handle on your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So if you can break it down into these 5 things, you're really good to go. By the end of that, you'll have an idea over what it looks like. All right. So today was really just a short overview. We explained the difference between your scope 1 and 2 emissions, found your biggest gap, math, and gave you really the only 5 things that you need to have a proper handle on your scope 1 and 2 emissions. Of course, if you actually want to be building a step-by-step report, that's what our eMission Possible course is for. So it's short, as in under an hour short. You can squeeze it in between meetings. It's practical. We will help you use your own real data to come out with a scope 1 and 2 emissions report. And we promise it's jargon-free and you'll have our full support all the way through. I'm also thrilled to announce that our eMission Possible course has very recently been CPD certified. So this means that when you finish the course, you will get 5 CPD credits, which count towards your professional development. So if your business has requirements for professional development, this will help you towards that. And continuing the good news, and as a big thank you for joining us, we have a special offer for today's attendees. We are giving a €100 discount on the eMissions Possible course with the code eMissionWebinar. It'll be valid until the 3rd of April, so get after it. And as one last extra special announcement, the first 3 registrants who attended today's webinar will actually be getting the course absolutely free of charge. We will be contacting the lucky winners after we wrap up. And yeah, hopefully you all, if not sign up for the course, then take some value away from today's webinar. So we do have a bit of time. As promised, we have our Q&A. So
Yeah.
if
Kiri, we have a question in the chat here from
Perfect.
Peter. So maybe Nasia, if you want to take this one. So Peter says our monthly data is based on invoicing rather than calculating actual consumption data per equipment. Is that okay?
Yes, it's usually okay as long as you are using actual units. That's your kg and meters. So if your invoice has, for example, the euro amount, do not count that. The money currency doesn't work when you're calculating emissions. You need to know the unit, which is in kgs, liters, anything. It's a measurement unit, basically. So as long as your invoice bills, your fuel card statements have those units, you can definitely use them. Monthly data is actually recommended than annual data. So that's a go ahead as well.
Yeah. Lisa is also asking, could you review the calculation again, please? So maybe if we go back to the 5-step slide there, Kiri.
Here we go.
So
yes.
I just go through it quickly there for you, Lisa, again. So your source list is basically sit down with a piece of paper, write down all of the energy that is used within your company, things under your control that you're born in scope 1, things you're purchasing in scope 2. From that, then you get the kilograms or the kilowatts or the, whatever unit of measurement you're using for each of those in your source list, and put it beside it. How much do you use each month? Then you get your emission factor, which is determined dependent on the country that you are based. Here in Ireland, we use SSEI or the EPA. conversion values, but each country has some conversion values. You take your baseline year, which is the previous year, the full year, calendar year, and then you just multiply the units of energy, of electricity, of whatever fuel you have purchased or burned, and multiply it by the emission factor. And that's your CO2 equivalent. It really is that easy. Okay, so I hope that answered Lisa's question. Any other question? We had some questions actually before you're welcome, Lisa. Before the webinar, we were asking on LinkedIn for people to put in questions. So maybe one for Kiri here. How do we track refrigerant leaks if we don't have records? And this might align with the person that talked about refrigerants before.
Yeah. So this is actually a really easy thing to do. Basically, you just want to be checking your refrigerant meter during non-peak hours, of course. And what you would do is just check it daily for a few days and see if it's decreasing. So if you're looking at the meter and in non-peak hours, you know, say after your business closed or very early before people are arriving, if you see that it's going down over time, then you have some kind of leak in your system.
Okay, very good. Jason here in the chat is asking, I have 15 condensers, for AC. Each of them have a different CO2 amount on them for refrigerants. Should I add them together and add to our carbon footprint, or is that calculated in the energy used to power them? Maybe Nasia, would you want to take that one?
I'm just going to read that.
Will you repeat
again.
the question?
Yeah.
So
I'm
15...
reading it here. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think what you can do here is actually add them together. If you have your 15 condensers for your AC and each of them have a different CO2e amount, of course, they will naturally have different CO2e amounts because they may be of different brands, their capacity might be different. So that's completely fine. You do add all of them up together. And then they will be counted as your scope 1 emissions, right? So if we have a calculator here, which will be helpful here, which you can get access to as part of our emission possible course. So all of the emissions from your AC conditioners is your scope 1. You add all of the units from all of the 15 condensers together. The unit or the total that you receive, consider that as your direct scope 1 emissions. I think there's a second part to his question which says, or is that calculated in the energy used to power them? No, it will be used as scope 1 emissions. That's your direct emissions because the AC unit is on site. It's powering your premises. So that's your scope 1 emissions. They will not be counted as your scope 2 emissions. Hope that's clear.
Perfect. And yeah, anybody as well that wants to ask us any questions, don't forget that every Wednesday we host the Sustainability Hub as well, and you can come and ask any questions or simply send us an email at any stage, info@50shadesgreener.ie. Peter on the chat is asking, is there a source for emission factors for biogas, HVO, and 100% renewable electricity? So yes, there is emission factors for all of them. We can, if you want, Peter, we have your details. We can send you what we have from Ireland. If you are based in Ireland, like we say, each country use different conversion values. 100% renewable electricity, I know it might seem like a juxtaposition, but there is still some emissions coming out of 100% renewable electricity, because at the end of the day, electricity runs all from the same grid. When you're buying 100% renewable electricity, it doesn't mean that you're getting, green electricity coming to your building as such. So there is a bit of emissions still from the distribution of that energy, but your electricity supplier should also include that conversion factor on your invoices. If you start reading your invoices in the really, really small letter that nobody really can read, that's where you'll find probably the emissions factors of all green electricity. Peter, we can send you the entire database from Ireland, the UK of emission factors after this, if you like. Another question from Martin. If the AC unit is a sealed system and has only been filled once when installed, why is it calculated each year? Very good question, actually. Nasia, any ideas on this one? Is it only leaks that we're trying to identify?
Yeah, I think if there are small leaks that are happening in the EC units, that is what you need to be reporting every year. But if your EC unit is, say, for example, leak proof, then you don't have to report it every year because it's not emitting any emissions. So in your emissions report, you can always make a disclosure or a disclaimer of sorts saying that maintenance work has been carried out for the AC unit for the baseline year or the reporting year, and that no leaks were found and therefore no emissions were produced from a sealed AC unit. That's all you need to do. So any unit or any equipment that has used emissions that you've reported on previously and you're not doing that for any future reporting years, always disclose that you've done it previously, you're not doing it any longer, simply because the unit is not any longer used. In your instance, if it's sealed, so just disclose it. But in your case, if it's sealed, if it's not in use, do not report its emissions that have previously been accounted for, but do check for any leaks. If there have been leaks, yes, they need to be reported under Scope 1 emissions.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Our data is all over the place. Is that normal? Absolutely.
Yes.
I think that's perhaps, once you get over the whole, we have now the factors, emission factors, we are not scared of the calculation. The hardest part is always to gather your data. Because if you haven't done this before, chances are that it's spread all over the place, different departments, different places. People don't have time to help you. We've seen it all. So really putting time and a team together, or even speak to all head of departments in every organization. Finance is a really good place to go. Even purchasing departments, another really good place to go. But yeah, having issues finding your data is the most normal thing in the world. And also, you could find gaps even when you are as organized as you can be. You can have that gaps in your data, but as long as you actually explain that in your emissions report, so you write an explanation of what you have calculated and how you have calculated and the gaps that are there. Nobody can ever come then and say your reporting is wrong. If you have put your hand up and told them the good, the bad, and the ugly, I calculated all these, but I'm missing all that. So yeah, having data all over the place happens all the time. Do we have time? So somebody has to leave. Thank you all. It was great. And sorry, my sign off. Sure, we only have a couple of minutes more. Yeah. Let me see if we had any other questions. Is electricity always a Scope 2? Nasia?
Yes and no. Okay, so if you are purchasing, we'll make it simple again. Okay, so if you are purchasing electricity from the grid, it will be classified as your Scope 2. Okay, but if you are generating the electricity yourself on site, then it's your Scope 1. So it really depends on where and how the electricity is generated and used by your company. In most cases, majority, I would say 95%, companies are using the electricity that they have purchased from the grid. And in that case, it will be counted as your Scope 2 emissions, simply because they've done all the burning and the emission emitting at the time of the generation at the grid. So when the supplier is sending you the electricity to power your premises, it's already done its emissions production. So in that case, it will be counted as your Scope 2. If you're generating it on site, then it's Scope 1. Easy peasy.
Famous last words. Okay, well, that's all we have time for today.
Well, yeah, shame, because the questions were wonderful, and thank you guys so much for putting them in the chat. Again, if you have any more, pop into the hub, send us an email, we'll get back to you. But thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you learned a little something. I hope you gained a bit of confidence and clarity, or at the very least, you just have one less thing to Google. So with that, I'll music us out. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.